The idea of class consciousness first appeared when people began to notice that life was not the same for everyone. In the middle of the 19th century, a German thinker named Karl Marx wrote about the way workers and owners see the world differently. Marx said that workers share a common set of interests because they all sell their labor for a wage. He called this shared interest class consciousness. In simple terms, class consciousness means that a group of people becomes aware that they belong to the same economic group and that they have similar goals. Marx believed that this awareness could lead the group to act together to change the rules that keep them in a weaker position. Another early voice came from a Hungarian writer named Georg Lukács. Lukács added that class consciousness is not just about knowing one's place, but also about seeing how the whole society is organized. He wrote that when people understand the larger picture, they can see why some rules feel unfair. Lukács used the word totality to describe the whole system, but he explained it as the whole of social life taken together. By putting the idea in plain language, Lukács helped people see that class consciousness is a way of looking at the big picture, not just a private feeling. To see how class consciousness works in everyday life, imagine a small school. In the school hallway, a group of students notices that the same few staff members always do the cleaning. The students notice that the cleaning crew works early in the morning, gets paid a low wage, and has little time off. When the students talk about it, they start to realize that the cleaners share a common situation. That realization is a tiny form of class consciousness. The students may decide to ask the principal for better pay or more breaks. The key point is that the group becomes aware of a shared condition and then thinks about changing it together. A second example can be seen in a neighborhood shop. The shop owner decides how much to charge for a loaf of bread. The customers notice that the price is higher than at the big supermarket across town. Over time, the customers realize that they all have to pay the same higher price because the owner sets the price for the whole block. When they talk, they understand that they are all affected by the same pricing rule. That shared understanding can lead them to organize a buyer's club, to buy together from a larger supplier, or to ask the owner to lower the price. The moment the customers see their common interest, they are showing class consciousness. Marx and Lukács did not create the idea out of thin air. Their thoughts grew out of real struggles. In 1848, a wave of revolts swept across Europe. Workers, students, and peasants rose up against monarchs and landlords. The uprisings were sparked by a feeling that the old rules favored a tiny elite, while most people suffered. In many cities, workers marched together, shouted the same slogans, and demanded better wages and political rights. The 1848 revolts are an early historical example of class consciousness turning into collective action. Though the revolts were eventually crushed, they showed that when people see themselves as part of a larger group, they can challenge powerful forces. Across the Atlantic, the United States saw a different but related development. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, labor unions began to form. Workers in factories, railroads, and mines joined together to demand safer conditions, reasonable hours, and fair pay. The rise of unions was built on the idea that workers shared a common fate. When a group of miners in Pennsylvania went on strike in 1902, they asked for higher wages and better safety rules. The strike succeeded because the miners acted as a united group, not as isolated individuals. The growth of unions shows how class consciousness can turn into organized power that changes laws and workplace rules. Even with these clear examples, some people argue that class consciousness is not real or not useful. One counter-argument says that people act only as individuals, guided by personal choices rather than group interests. This view holds that each person decides what to buy, where to work, and how to vote based on personal preference. From this angle, the idea that a whole class can think together seems too simple. Critics point to stories of people from the same economic background who make very different choices. They say that personal ambition, family values, or cultural habits can outweigh any shared class interest. A second counter-argument treats class as merely a statistical label. In this view, working class or middle class are numbers used by economists to sort people for surveys. The argument claims that these labels do not capture real feelings or motivations. If class is just a number, then the idea of a shared awareness may be an illusion. Some scholars argue that people feel more attached to their hometown, religion, or hobby than to an economic group. They suggest that policies should focus on individual needs rather than on a broad class category. Both counter-arguments have some truth. People do make personal choices, and statistical categories can hide differences. Yet the examples of school cleaners, shop customers, the 1848 uprisings, and the rise of unions show that a sense of shared position can still arise. When many people notice that they face the same obstacles, they often start to talk about those obstacles. Those conversations can grow into a collective feeling that we are in this together. That feeling is the heart of class consciousness. To make the idea even clearer, consider an analogy. Think of a group of people on a boat that has a small leak. If each person only worries about their own bucket, they may keep bailing water for a while, but the boat will still sink. When the passengers notice the leak together, they can decide to patch it as a team. The leak represents the economic pressures that affect a whole class. The act of patching it together shows class consciousness in action. A second analogy uses a classroom. Imagine a teacher who gives the same difficult math problem to every student. Some students finish quickly, while others struggle. If the struggling students talk to each other and realize they all need more help, they can ask the teacher for a review session. Their shared request changes the classroom rule. The math problem is like a market condition that affects many people. The students' joint request is an example of class consciousness leading to a change. Modern interpretations of class consciousness keep the same basic idea but use new tools. Social media platforms let people share stories about wages, rent, and job conditions instantly. A hashtag about living wages can bring together workers from different cities who never met in person. When the hashtag trends, it shows that many people have become aware of a common problem. That online awareness can lead to real-world protests, petitions, or new laws. In this way, technology amplifies the old idea that a group can see its shared interest and act on it. Another modern example comes from popular media. Television shows and movies often portray characters who struggle with money, housing, or job security. When a popular series shows a family losing a job and having to move, viewers may recognize similar experiences in their own lives. Those viewers may discuss the episode on forums, noting how the story reflects a broader economic pattern. The discussion can spark a feeling that many people face the same issue, which is a form of class consciousness sparked by art. The original words of Karl Marx still echo in today's debates. Marx wrote, "The proletarians have nothing to lose but their chains." In plain language, he meant that workers have little to lose by standing together, because they already have few advantages. This quote reminds listeners that the power to change comes from recognizing a shared position. Georg Lukács added, "When the class becomes aware of its own place in the whole, it can act as a force." This sentence tells us that awareness is the first step toward collective power. Later in the series, the history of class struggles will be explored in more depth. The next section will look at how the 1917 Russian Revolution built on the ideas of Marx and how it changed the world map. After that, a chapter on modern media will examine how movies, music, and online videos shape people's view of class today. Those sections will show how the simple idea of class consciousness has grown into a major force in politics, culture, and everyday life. To sum up the basic idea, class consciousness is the moment when a group of people sees that they share a similar economic situation and that this shared situation gives them a common goal. It is not just a feeling. It is a way of looking at the world that can lead to joint action. The early thinkers Marx and Lukács gave the idea its name and explained why it matters. Real-world examples, like school cleaners noticing who does the work or shoppers seeing the same price, show the idea in everyday life. Historical moments such as the 1848 revolts and the rise of labor unions prove that the idea can move from thought to action. Counter-arguments remind that individuals and statistics matter too, but they do not erase the power of a shared sense of belonging. Modern tools like social media and popular shows keep the idea alive and help new generations feel the same awareness. The story of class consciousness is a story of people learning that they are not alone, and that together they can shape the rules that affect their lives. The story of class awareness begins long before the word class was ever written. In the earliest cities of Mesopotamia, people already felt the pull of who owned land, who tended fields, and who sold grain. When a farmer gave a portion of his harvest to the ruler gave protection in return. That simple exchange created a feeling that some people held more power over food than others. The ancient poet Hesiod, writing in the 10th century BCE, described a world where the rich lived in big houses and the poor worked the land. He wrote, "The rich sit on high, the poor crawl low." That line shows that even then people noticed a gap between those who owned and those who labored. In ancient Egypt, the same pattern appeared. The pharaoh owned the Nile's flood, the priests controlled the temples, and the workers built the pyramids. Workers were paid in grain, and the grain was stored in granaries that the state controlled. When the grain ran low, the workers felt the sting of hunger, while the elite still ate fine bread. The Egyptian tale of the story of the eloquent peasant tells how a poor farmer asked a noble for justice after his field was taken. The story ends with the noble's punishment, showing that the idea of unfairness was already part of the public mind. Moving to ancient Greece, the philosopher Aristotle wrote about slaves and for free men. He said that some people are naturally meant to rule, while others are meant to be ruled. Yet even Aristotle noticed that the poorer citizens of Athens often gathered in the agora, the marketplace, to complain about taxes and war costs. The famous playwright Aristophanes, in his comedy The Knights, mocked the rich who lived in luxury while the common folk struggled. The jokes were a way for the crowd to voice a shared feeling that they were being squeezed by a privileged few. The ancient Roman Republic also shows early signs of class feeling. The plebeians, who were the common farmers, artisans, and soldiers, fought for a set of rights called the tribunes of the plebs. The plebeians organized strikes, known as secessions, where they stopped working and left the city until the Senate gave them land reforms. The Roman historian Livy recorded one of these events, noting how the crowd shouted, "We want land, we want justice." The fact that they could band together and demand change shows that a sense of belonging to a group with shared interests was already alive. Some scholars argue that ancient societies did not have class conflict because they lacked modern capitalism. They claim that most people accepted their place as part of a divine order, and that wars and famines were seen as the will of the gods rather than the result of economic inequality. This view points to the lack of organized labor unions or political parties in those times. However, the stories of grain riots, plebeian secessions, and the poet's lament suggest that people still felt a gap between the haves and the have-nots, even if they expressed it in myth or ritual rather than in modern protest slogans. When the Middle Ages arrived, the idea of class grew clearer through the rise of guilds. In a medieval town, a guild was a group of craftsmen who shared a trade, such as blacksmiths, weavers, or bakers. The guild set rules for who could work, what wages could be paid, and how apprentices learned the craft. This created a sense of belonging for members, but also a clear line between those inside the guild and those outside, such as itinerant workers or peasants who could not afford the fees. The guilds kept prices steady, but they also kept wealth within a small circle. A story from 14th century Florence shows how guild members felt their own class identity. The painter Giotto, who was also a member of the Wool Guild, helped fund a public fountain for the poor. The inscription on the fountain read, "For those who cannot buy water, we give it free." The act was both charity and a reminder that the guild saw itself as a protector of the city's poor. Yet the same guild also lobbied the city council to raise taxes on merchants from other regions, showing a clear line between Muslim and Thin. The medieval period also saw the rise of the feudal system, where lords owned land and peasants worked it. The peasants paid a portion of their harvest as rent, and in return they received protection. When the harvest failed, the lords still demanded rent, and the peasants often faced starvation. The Peasants' Revolt of 1381 in England began when a new tax on wool forced peasants to pay more. The rebels marched to London, chanting, "We want our rights, we want our bread." The revolt was crushed, but the memory of the march lingered as a sign that ordinary people could feel a shared grievance. One everyday analogy helps to picture how class feeling works. Imagine a family budgeting for groceries. The parents earn a salary and decide how much money to spend on food each week. If the budget is tight, the children may notice that they have to eat simple meals while the parents enjoy a steak on special occasions. The children begin to sense that the family's money is divided unequally, and they may talk among themselves about why they get less. That conversation is a tiny version of class awareness, a group of people recognizing that they share a common position in the family's economy. Another simple picture comes from a school cafeteria. The cafeteria offers a basic lunch for a low price and a premium lunch with extra sides for a higher price. Some students can afford the premium meal, while others can only buy the basic one. Over time, the students who can only afford the basic meal notice that they are missing out on the extra food and perhaps the social buzz that comes with a fancier lunch. They start to talk about the price gap, and they may feel that the school's pricing system favors the wealthier families. This cafeteria scene mirrors how larger societies set prices for housing, healthcare, and education, and how people become aware of the split. The Industrial Revolution changed the scale of class awareness dramatically. Factories sprouted in cities, and a new class of wage workers emerged. These workers sold their labor for a daily wage, often working long hours in dangerous conditions. The factory owners, who owned the machines and the buildings, earned huge profits. The gap between the two groups grew wider each year. The writer Charles Dickens, in his novel Hard Times, described the lives of factory workers who could barely afford a warm coat. He wrote, "The cold wind cut through the thin cloth, and the workers shivered, while the mill owner sat by a fire." The novel's vivid picture helped readers feel the workers' plight. One of the most famous thinkers to write about this new gap was Adam Smith. In his book, The Wealth of Nations, Smith explained how individuals acting in their own interest could create wealth for a whole nation. He gave the example of a baker, a butcher, and a brewer, each looking after his own profit, yet together they provide food for the community. He said, "It is not from the benevolence of the butcher, the brewer, or the baker that we expect our dinner, but from their own interest." While Smith praised the market's power to create wealth, he also warned that competition could push wages down and leave workers in poverty. His idea that the market can be both helpful and harmful sparked many debates about class. Later, a German thinker named Friedrich Engels took the idea further. In his pamphlet, The Condition of the Working Class in England, Engels described the squalid living conditions of factory workers in Manchester. He wrote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." Engels argued that the poor and the rich were locked in a permanent conflict because the rich needed cheap labor to keep profits high. He believed that the working class would eventually realize their shared plight and rise up to change the system. Engels' words gave a name to the feeling that workers across factories were feeling the same pressure. A powerful anecdote from the French Revolution illustrates how class feeling can spark massive change. In 1789, the price of bread rose sharply due to bad harvests and war taxes. The people of Paris, already struggling to afford basic food, gathered in the streets and shouted, "Bread! Bread! Bread!" The crowd stormed the Bastille, a symbol of royal power, and demanded that the king lower the price of bread. This event, known as the Bread Riots, showed that when a large group of people feels that a basic need is being taken away, they can act together in a dramatic way. The riots helped launch the French Revolution, which aimed to overturn the old class system of nobles and clergy. Another tragic story comes from the United States in 1911. The Triangle Shirtwaist Factory in New York employed mostly young immigrant women who worked long hours for low pay. The factory's owners had locked the doors to prevent theft, but when a fire broke out, the workers could not escape. Many jumped to their deaths because the exits were blocked. The fire killed 106 workers and shocked the nation. The public outcry led to new safety laws and gave labor unions a stronger voice. The tragedy showed how a group of workers, united by their low wages and dangerous conditions, could become a force for change when the world saw their suffering. Some modern thinkers claim that technology has erased class lines. They point to the internet, smartphones, and gig economy platforms that let anyone sell a product or offer a ride. They argue that because anyone can earn money online, the old divide between rich and poor is fading. However, data shows that the richest users still capture most of the profit, while many gig workers struggle with low pay and no benefits. The promise of equal opportunity often hides a new kind of inequality, where those who own the platforms become very rich, and the workers remain precarious. Another counter-argument says that ancient societies did not have class conflict because they lacked money markets and factories. Proponents of this view argue that without a wage system, there could be no class struggle. Yet the evidence of grain riots, plebeian secessions, and slave revolts suggests that people still felt a sense of us versus them. The feeling may have been expressed in different words, but the awareness of a power gap was present. The ancient stories remind that class consciousness does not need modern money to appear. Recall the earlier definition of class consciousness as the awareness of one's own class position and shared interests. In the ancient world, that awareness showed up as myths and protests. In medieval guilds, it appeared as membership rules and collective bargaining. In the industrial age, it turned into organized labor and political pamphlets. Each era added new tools, but the core feeling remained the same. People noticing that they belong to a group that shares a common economic fate. Looking forward, the next part of the video will explore how modern media shapes class awareness today. Television, social media, and online news can highlight the lives of the wealthy and the struggles of the poor at the same time. The way stories are told can either deepen the sense of "we are in this together" or make the gap feel even larger. The upcoming section will examine how memes, viral videos, and influencer culture influence the way people see their own class position. In summary, the roots of class awareness stretch from ancient grain storages to medieval guild halls, from the bustling streets of Paris during the bread riots to the smoky floors of a 19th century factory. Thinkers like Adam Smith and Friedrich Engels gave words to the feeling that many already live. Everyday analogies of a family budgeting for groceries or a school cafeteria pricing meals help to see the pattern in daily life. Counter-arguments that deny ancient conflict or claim technology ends class differences remind that the story is still debated. Real-world events, such as the French bread riots and the Triangle Shirtwaist Fire, show how the feeling can turn into action. By tracing these threads, the video builds a bridge from the mind works like a quiet room where ideas can settle. When a person starts to notice where they fit in society, a few simple steps happen inside that room. First, the person looks around and gathers clues. Those clues can be the type of house, the kind of car, the clothes on a hanger, the way a boss talks in a meeting, or the amount of money that comes in each month. The brain takes each clue and stores it in a small box labeled "What I See." Second, the brain compares the clues it has collected with the clues it sees in other people. It asks questions such as, do I have the same car as my friends? Or, do I earn as much as my co-workers? The brain lines up the boxes side by side and looks for patterns. Third, the brain gives a name to the pattern. It might call the pattern middle class, or working class, or upper class. Fourth, the brain repeats the name to itself. The name becomes a label that the person can carry. Fifth, the brain lets the label affect how the person feels about themselves and how they act. The label can make the person feel proud, shy, angry, or hopeful. Those 5 steps: collect clues, compare, name the pattern, repeat the name, let it shape feeling, are the mental path that leads a person to recognize a class. Antonio Gramsci, an Italian thinker who wrote about culture and power, described a similar process. He said that the ideas of the ruling group become the common ideas of the time. In simple words, the thoughts that dominate the media, the schools, and the churches tell people what is normal. Gramsci wrote, "The ideas of the ruling class become the dominant ideas in any given epoch. When a person hears those ideas over and over, the brain stores them as part of the trot of the "What I See" box. The ideas tell the person which habits are good, which jobs are respectable, and which lifestyles are worth aspiring to. By hearing the same ideas, the brain learns to sort people into groups. That sorting is the first step toward class consciousness. C. Wright Mills, an American sociologist, added another piece to the puzzle. He called the ability to link personal experience with larger social forces the sociological imagination. He wrote, "Well, the sociological imagination enables us to grasp history and biography and the relations between the two within society." In plain language, Mills meant that when a person looks at their own paycheck, they can also see the bigger picture of how wages are set across the whole economy. When a person sees that their salary has barely moved for 10 years, they can ask why the whole group of workers seems stuck. That question is a sign that the brain is moving from just collecting clues to linking those clues with larger patterns. That linking is what turns a simple observation into a sense of belonging to a class. A teenage girl named Maya lived in a suburb where most of her friends drove brand new smartphones and the latest model of a sports car. One day, Maya noticed that her best friend, Lena, started to drive an older, beat-up sedan that had a dent on the bumper. Maya thought about why Lena's car looked different. She remembered that Lena's family had just moved to a smaller house after her dad lost his job at the factory. Maya's brain took that clue, an older car, and compared it with the other cars she saw on the street. Most of the cars were shiny, but a few were older, like Lena's. Maya then labeled the group of older cars as working-class cars. She repeated the label in her mind, thinking, Lena's family is part of the working class now. That label made Maya feel a little uneasy. She wondered if she would ever have an older car too. The mental steps were clear. Notice the car, compare it, name the group, repeat the name, feel something about it. In another scene, a factory worker named Carlos checked his bank account on a Friday night. He saw the same number of dollars he had earned for the past 12 months. The amount was enough to pay rent and buy groceries, but not enough for a vacation. Carlos thought about his co-worker, Maria, who also got the same paycheck. He also thought about the manager, who earned twice as much. Carlos' brain stored the paycheck amount, compared it with the manager's salary, named the group working class, repeated the name, and felt a mix of frustration and solidarity. He started to talk with Maria about how they could ask for a raise together. The mental steps had moved him from a private worry to a shared sense of belonging. These two everyday stories show how class consciousness can appear in ordinary life. The process does not need a textbook. It can happen in a hallway, in a kitchen, or on a social media feed. The brain simply follows the 5 steps, and the ideas of thinkers like Gramsci and Mills help explain why those steps feel natural. Not everyone agrees that income or possessions are the main way people see their class. One counterpoint says that hobbies and interests shape identity more than money. A young man named Sam loved skateboarding, painting, and indie music. He spent most of his free time at a community skate park, which was free to use. Sam's friends came from different income levels, but they all shared the same love for skate culture. Sam's brain collected clues about his hobbies, compared them with others, and gave himself the label skater. He felt that label more strongly than any label about money. He believed that his class identity was tied to the skate community, not to the size of his paycheck. This view argues that culture can be a stronger guide than economics. A second counterpoint focuses on social media. Platforms like Instagram and TikTok let people show a polished version of their lives. A person can post pictures of a fancy dinner, a new outfit, or a vacation, even if those moments are rare or borrowed. The brain sees those pictures and may think the person belongs to a higher class, even if the real daily life is different. A college student named Priya posted a photo of a designer bag, but she had to borrow the bag from a friend and could not afford it herself. Her followers liked the post and assumed she was wealthy. Priya's brain stored the clue, the designer bag, compared it with other posts, labeled herself upper class, and felt pressure to keep up the image. In reality, her paycheck was modest, and she worried about rent. The social media mask can hide the true class signals, making the mental steps less reliable. This argument says that the digital world can blur the line between real class and imagined class. Both counterpoints remind the listener that the mental steps are not set in stone. The brain can use different clues, and the clues can be misleading. Still, the basic pattern, collect, compare, name, repeat, feel, remains a useful way to see how class consciousness forms. History offers vivid examples of how people came to see themselves as a class. In the 1930s, the Dust Bowl forced many families to leave the Great Plains and travel westward in search of work. One family, the Thompsons, packed their belongings into a battered truck and joined a line of migrants heading to California. Along the road, they met other families with similar stories. Farms that had turned to dust, crops that had failed, and jobs that had disappeared. The Thompsons' brain collected clues about the loss of land, the empty fields, and the shared hardship. When they arrived in California, they saw that many other migrants lived in makeshift camps called Hoovervilles. The brain compared the Thompsons' experience with the experience of the other migrants and named the group immigrant workers. The name repeated itself in conversations, songs, and newspaper articles. The migrants began to organize, demanding better wages and living conditions. Their shared label helped them see that they were not alone, that a whole class of people faced the same problem. The Dust Bowl migration shows how a large group can move from personal trouble to a collective class identity. A second historical moment took place in the 1960s during the Civil Rights Movement. In the southern United States, black students staged sit-ins at segregated lunch counters. One group of students, the Freedom Riders, rode buses into the Deep South to challenge segregation laws. While the main focus was on race, the sit-ins also revealed a clear economic divide. The students saw that the white patrons at the counters often wore expensive suits and carried briefcases, while the black students wore modest clothing and often came from low-income families. The students' brains collected clues about clothing, the size of the tips left on the counters, and the way the owners treated them. They compared those clues with the treatment of white customers and named the group working-class black citizens. The name spread among the protesters and helped them organize demands for fair wages as well as equal rights. The sit-in showed that class and race can intersect, and that recognizing a class can strengthen a broader fight for justice. Both anecdotes illustrate how real events can push people through the mental steps more quickly. When a crisis hits, whether a dust storm or a protest, people are forced to notice the patterns around them. The brain then moves faster from collecting clues to naming a group, because the stakes feel higher. Modern interpretations of class consciousness still use the 5 mental steps, but they add new tools. Today, data from surveys, tax records, and online behavior can give a clearer picture of how income, education, and occupation line up. Researchers can map these data points to show where the working class ends and the middle class begins. The brain, however, still relies on everyday clues. A person might see a neighbor's new roof, hear about a raise on a podcast, or notice a friend's new streaming subscription. Those clues feed the same mental process. One modern example comes from a city where a new bike share program was introduced. The program offered cheap rides for low-income residents, but required a credit card for payment. A young mother named Aisha tried the program and found that she could travel to her job without paying for a car. She noticed that many of the users were also from low-income neighborhoods. Aisha's brain collected the clue, bike share is affordable, compared it with the fact that many riders lived in similar housing, named the group low-income commuters, repeated the label, and felt a sense of belonging to a group that was gaining new mobility options. This story shows how a policy can create a new class marker and help people see their own class. Another contemporary story involves a tech startup that offered free meals and a more vacation policy. Employees at the startup began to notice that they worked longer hours than workers at a nearby manufacturing plant. They also saw that the startup's office had a sleek design, while the factory had a gritty look. The workers at the startup collected clues about the office design, the lack of vacation, and the high salary, compared them with the factory workers' clues about steady pay and set hours, named the group knowledge workers, repeated the label, and felt a distinct identity separate from the poor blue-collar workers. This shows how new kinds of work can create fresh class labels. Analogies can help make the mental steps clearer. Imagine a child sorting colored beads. The child first looks at each bead, then puts beads of the same color together, then names the pile "red beads," and finally feels happy because the pile looks neat. The brain does the same with class. It looks at each clue, groups similar clues, names the group, and feels something about the neat pile. The process is simple, but the result can be powerful. Another analogy uses a kitchen recipe. A cook gathers ingredients, compares them with a recipe book, names the dish, repeats the name while cooking, and then tastes the final meal. The cook's brain follows the same steps as a person forming class consciousness. The ingredients are clues. The recipe book is the larger social knowledge. The dish name is the class label, and the taste is the feeling that comes with belonging. The ideas of Gramsci and Mills still echo in these modern scenes. Gramsci's point about dominant ideas helps explain why media messages about wealth and success often shape the clues people collect. When TV shows always feature big houses and luxury cars, the brain stores those images as what success looks like. Mill's sociological imagination reminds the listener that class consciousness lives in the small choices that fill a day. When a person walks to the grocery aisle, looks at the cereal boxes, and picks a brand, that moment holds more than a taste for sweet corn. It also shows how the person sees his or her place in society. The same is true when a person decides whether to pay for a premium streaming plan or stay with the free tier. Those decisions echo the ideas of Pierre Bourdieu and David Riesman, who both wrote about how social groups shape personal taste. Bourdieu called the hidden rules that guide taste habitus. Habitus is the way that upbringing, school, and work teach a person how to act without a list of instructions. It is like a set of habits that feel natural. In simple terms, habitus means that a person's choices often match the class they belong to, even if they do not think about it. Bourdieu wrote, "Taste is a social function. It classifies, and it classifies the classifier." The quote means that taste helps sort people and also lets the sorter feel a sense of belonging. Riesman added another layer. He described 3 types of people: the inner-directed, the other-directed, and the self-directed. The inner-directed type follows personal feelings, the other-directed type looks to peers for cues, and the self-directed type mixes the two. He said, "The other is the source of the self's definition." In everyday life, most people fall somewhere between the inner-directed and other-directed styles. The balance shows how class awareness works in tiny decisions. Consider the cereal aisle. A shopper sees a box of organic, high-priced granola and a box of sugary, cheap cornflakes. The price difference is obvious, but the choice also signals something about the shopper's class identity. If the shopper buys the granola, the habitus of a middle-class upbringing may be at work. The shopper may have learned that health, sustainability, and brand reputation are signs of a good life. The habitus tells the shopper that paying more shows responsibility and taste. If the shopper reaches for the cheap cornflakes, the habitus may reflect a working-class background where price and convenience matter more than brand story. The choice still tells a story about where the shopper feels they belong. A second example is the decision about a streaming service. One person may choose a basic plan that shows ads, while another may pay for a premium plan with no ads and exclusive shows. The premium plan costs more, but it also promises a smoother, more exclusive experience. The person who pays for it may be following a habitus that values status and the feeling of being in the know. The person who stays with the free plan may be following a habitus that values frugality and practical use. Both choices are shaped by how each person sees their place in society. These everyday moments are not random. They are part of a larger pattern that Bourdieu called cultural capital. Cultural capital is the knowledge, skills, and education that give a person power in social settings. Knowing which cereal is healthy or which streaming service has the latest series is a form of cultural capital. The more cultural capital a person has, the easier it is to move between social groups. In the grocery example, the shopper who can name the organic brand's source and its environmental impact shows cultural capital. In the streaming example, the shopper who can discuss the latest award-winning series shows cultural capital. Not everyone agrees that class drives these choices. One counter-argument says that personal taste alone decides what a person buys. This view holds that each person has a unique palette for flavor, comfort, or entertainment, and that those preferences are formed by individual experiences, not by class. Proponents point to people who love a cheap cereal because they grew up with it, or who stay with a free streaming plan because they enjoy the occasional ad break. They argue that taste can be independent of social rank. A second counter-argument claims that marketing, not class, pulls the strings. This view says that advertisers design messages that make any product look desirable. The cereal box with bright colors, cartoon mascots, and promises of fun can attract anyone, regardless of background. The streaming service that offers a free trial and highlights exclusive shows can lure viewers from any income level. According to this perspective, the power of branding and advertising overshadows any class-based habitus. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they do not erase the influence of class. Even when a person says they choose a cereal because they love the taste itself may have been shaped by the foods that were available at home. When a person says they follow a marketing campaign, the campaign itself often targets specific social groups. Advertisers research who is likely to buy what, and they tailor messages to those groups. The result is a loop where class and marketing reinforce each other. Historical anecdotes help illustrate how class consciousness moved through everyday life. In the 1970s, a shift occurred in white-collar office culture. Before the decade, many office workers wore formal suits, carried briefcases, and ate lunch at a downtown deli. By the mid-1970s, the business casual look began to appear. Workers started wearing sweaters, khakis, and loafers. The change was not just about comfort. It reflected a new class identity. The rise of corporate hierarchies and the spread of college degrees created a middle-class professional group that wanted to signal both competence and approachability. The new dress code acted as a visual cue of belonging to that emerging class. It also changed how people bought clothing, choosing brands that promised a polished yet relaxed look. A second anecdote comes from the 1990s rise of discount stores such as Walmart and Target. These stores offered a wide range of products at low prices, attracting shoppers from many income levels. Yet, the stores also created a new kind of class awareness. Shoppers who could afford higher-priced specialty stores felt a subtle pressure to prove they could find good deals without lowering their status. Meanwhile, shoppers who relied on discount stores used the low prices to stretch limited budgets, reinforcing a working-class identity tied to frugality. The presence of both stores in the same neighborhoods highlighted how class consciousness can be expressed through where people shop and what they consider a good purchase. Real-world applications of class consciousness stretch beyond food and media. In education, students often select schools that match their class background. A family that values academic prestige may pay for private tutoring or a private school, seeing those choices as part of their cultural capital. A family with fewer resources may rely on public schools and community programs, shaping a different set of expectations and opportunities. In leisure, the choice of a gym versus a park for exercise can also signal class. A gym membership costs money and often promises a certain status, while a park is free and open to all. The decision reflects both habitus and cultural capital. Modern interpretations of Bourdieu and Riesman adapt their ideas to today's digital world. Some scholars argue that social media platforms act as new stages for class performance. Posting a photo of a high-end coffee drink or a limited edition sneaker can be seen as a digital display of taste. The platform's algorithm then amplifies content that matches the viewer's habitus, creating echo chambers that reinforce class identity. Others point out that the gig economy blurs traditional class lines. A driver for a ride-sharing app may earn a decent income, but the lack of benefits and job security keeps the worker in a precarious position. The gig worker's choices about work hours and vehicle type still reflect class awareness, even if the job is technically self-employed. Analogies help make these ideas clearer. Think of class consciousness as a set of invisible glasses. When a person puts on the glasses, the world appears in shades that match their social background. The cereal boxes look either premium or basic, The streaming plans look either exclusive or sufficient. The glasses are not a physical object, but they shape what the person sees as normal. Another analogy compares habitus to a river's current. The river flows in a certain direction because of the landscape it has carved over time. A person's habitus flows in a direction shaped by family, school, and work. Even when a person tries to swim against the current, the river's force is strong. The river analogy shows why class habits are hard to change. Connecting back to the earlier definition of class consciousness, the everyday examples show how the abstract idea becomes concrete. Class consciousness is not only a political slogan. It is the feeling that a person's choices line up with a larger group. When a shopper picks a cereal, they are not just buying food. They are confirming a sense of belonging. When a viewer upgrades a streaming plan, they are not just paying more. They are signaling a status that aligns with a social group. The everyday actions tie the definition to lived experience. Looking ahead, the next part of the video will explore how media shapes class consciousness on a larger scale. It will examine how movies, news, and online platforms create images of what it means to be middle class, or working class, or upper class. The segment will also discuss how media can both reinforce and challenge class habits. By linking the daily choices discussed here to the broader media landscape, the video will show a full picture of how class consciousness operates from the grocery aisle to the global screen. In summary, class consciousness appears in daily choices like cereal brands and streaming plans. Bourdieu's habitus and cultural capital explain why those choices often match a person's social background. Riesman's idea of other-directed and self-directed people shows how peer influence and personal feeling blend in those decisions. Counter-arguments about personal taste and marketing highlight the debate, but they do not erase the class influence. Historical anecdotes from the 1970s office dress shift and the 1990s discount store boom illustrate how class awareness has moved through everyday life. Modern interpretations bring the ideas into the digital age, using analogies of glasses and river currents to make the concepts clear. The everyday examples tie back to the earlier definition and set the stage for the upcoming media section, where the story of class consciousness will continue to unfold. The story of how media shapes the way people think about class begins long before the age of smartphones. In the early days of radio, families gathered around a single speaker to hear the latest drama. One popular program in the 1930s was The Goldbergs. The show followed a Jewish family trying to make a living in a crowded city. Listeners could hear the worries of a mother who stretched a single paycheck to buy food and school supplies. At the same time, the program showed a neighbor who owned a small shop and seemed to have a little extra to spend on holidays. The contrast was subtle, but it let many hear the gap between a working family and a modest business owner. As the story unfolded, the audience began to notice how money could change daily life. Fast forward to the age of video sharing. In 2008, a YouTuber posted a series called Living on $2 a Day. The creator filmed a day in the life of a minimum wage worker who tried to buy food, pay rent, and keep a car running with just $2 for each meal. The video showed a grocery store aisle where the cheapest items were often the least healthy. It also showed a bus stop where the worker waited for a ride that would cost more than the day's earnings. Viewers from many countries watched the clip, left comments, and shared it with friends. The series made the struggle of low-wage earners visible to people who might never have seen it in person. Both the old radio drama and the modern YouTube series are examples of media that bring class differences into everyday conversation. They do not just report facts, they shape feelings. When a story is told with a human face, the audience can feel empathy. That feeling can turn into a sense of class awareness, a feeling that there is a real divide between those who have enough and those who do not. One of the first thinkers to write about how media affects perception was Marshall McLuhan. He said that the medium itself is part of the message. In simple terms, the way a story is delivered changes how people understand it. A radio voice that reaches a whole town at once can make a story feel like a shared experience. A video that can be paused, replayed, and shared on a phone can make a story feel personal and urgent. McLuhan's idea helps explain why a radio drama in the 1930s could plant a seed of class awareness, while a viral video can make that seed grow quickly. Another voice that is often heard in discussions of media and class is Noam Chomsky. He has warned that media often serves the interests of powerful groups. In his own words, the mass media serve as a system for transmitting the messages of the elite to the public. He means that the news, movies, and even social platforms can be used to keep the status quo. When the owners of media companies are also owners of large businesses, they may choose stories that make the rich look normal and the poor look unusual. This can keep people from questioning why some have more than others. The influence of media can be seen in popular TV shows that portray rich families. A well-known series follows a family that lives in a huge house, drives fancy cars, and travels on private jets. The show often includes scenes of lavish parties, designer clothing, and exotic vacations. While the series is meant to entertain, it also sends a message that wealth is a sign of success and happiness. Viewers who see the show may start to believe that having money is the main goal in life. At the same time, the show rarely shows the workers who clean the house, cook the meals, or drive the cars. Those people are invisible, and their lives are left out of the story. A different kind of example is a viral video that shows a group of minimum wage workers organizing a protest. The clip shows a line of people holding signs that read, "15 an hour now." The video includes a short interview with a worker who says, "I work 2 jobs and still can pay my rent." The clip spreads quickly, and people start sharing it with captions like, "We need a living wage." The video makes the issue of low pay visible to many who might not have thought about it before. It also shows how social platforms can amplify a message that challenges the existing power structure. These 2 examples show opposite ends of a spectrum. One shows wealth as normal and desirable, the other shows poverty as a problem that needs fixing. Both are powerful because they reach large audiences. The way they are framed can change how people think about class. There are people who argue that media does not shape class awareness, but simply reflects what already exists. They say that if most people are already aware of class differences, then news and shows just show that reality. In this view, a TV drama about a rich family is simply telling a story that many already know, that some people have more money than others. The argument continues that the audience already decides what to think, and the media cannot force a new belief. Another counter-argument is that individuals filter out class messages. This idea says that each person has a mental filter that blocks out information they do not want to hear. If a viewer does not like hearing about poverty, they might ignore a news report about wage gaps. If a fan of a show loves the glamorous lifestyle, they might focus only on the fun parts and ignore the lack of working-class characters. In this view, media can try to influence, but the audience has the final say. Both counter-arguments have some truth. Media does show what is happening in the world, and people do choose what to pay attention to. However, the way a story is told can make it easier or harder for the audience to notice certain details. A news report that uses a graph to show rising income inequality can make the problem clearer than a story that only mentions a single success story. A TV show that includes a scene where a housekeeper talks about her rent can plant a seed of awareness that would not be there otherwise. The way media shapes class awareness can be linked to earlier ideas about the roots of class thought. In the historical roots section, it was noted that early philosophers talked about the division of labor and how some people own land while others work it. Those ideas first entered public conversation through pamphlets and newspapers. Today, the same ideas travel through podcasts, streaming services, and short videos. The method has changed, but the goal of spreading ideas about class remains similar. In everyday life, people often see class messages without realizing it. A billboard that shows a luxury car driving past a cheap apartment building can send a subtle message that success looks like a fancy vehicle. A news headline that reads, "Small business thrives amid economic growth," can suggest that the economy is good for everyone, even if many people are still struggling. These small cues add up over time, shaping how people think about their own place in society. To understand how media works, it helps to think of an analogy. Imagine a garden where each plant is a belief about class. The gardener is the media. When the gardener waters certain plants, they grow tall and strong. When the gardener blocks sunlight from other plants, they stay small. The gardener does not create the plants, but the gardener decides which ones get the most care. In the same way, media does not create class differences, but it can decide which ideas get the most attention. Another analogy is a mirror. A mirror shows an image of what is in front of it. If the mirror is slightly tilted, the image looks different. Media can act like a tilted mirror, showing the world in a way that emphasizes some parts and downplays others. When a news program chooses to focus on a billionaire's new yacht, the mirror reflects wealth as the main story. When a documentary chooses to focus on a community garden, the mirror reflects solidarity and shared effort. Real-world applications of these ideas can be seen in policy debates. When lawmakers discuss raising the minimum wage, they often cite viral videos that show workers struggling to pay for basics. Those videos can sway public opinion, making it easier for politicians to pass new laws. On the other hand, when a popular TV show depicts a rich family giving back to the community, it can create a narrative that the wealthy already care about the poor, reducing pressure for systemic change. Modern interpretations of media's role in class awareness build on the work of McLuhan and Chomsky. Some scholars argue that the rise of social media has turned every user into a small broadcaster. In this view, the power to shape class narratives is no longer held only by big companies, but also by ordinary people who share their stories. Others point out that algorithms, the hidden rules that decide which posts you see, can still favor content that makes money. An algorithm may push a drama about a rich lifestyle because it gets more clicks, while a serious documentary about wage gaps gets fewer views. The algorithm then becomes a new kind of gatekeeper. A quote from Marshall McLuhan helps illustrate this point. "We shape our tools, and then our tools shape us." In simple terms, people create media tools, but those tools later influence how people think. A quote from Noam Chomsky adds another angle. "The smart way to keep people passive is to keep them divided." This means that when media shows class differences as natural and unchangeable, it can keep people from working together for change. The story of the Goldberg shows how early media could gently point out class gaps. Listeners heard about a mother who saved a penny for a new dress, and they could feel the tension between wanting more and having less. The show never shouted about inequality, but the everyday details made the audience notice the gap. The 2008 Living on $2 a Day series shows a modern version of that. By putting a camera in a real kitchen, the creator let viewers see the exact amount of food that could be bought with a tiny budget. The series did not use academic charts. It used a simple plate of rice and beans to show the reality of low wages. Both examples prove that media does not need big speeches to teach about class. Simple stories, shown in a clear way, can plant a lasting awareness. When a viewer watches a scene of a rich family eating a gourmet meal, they may feel envy or admiration. When they later see a video of a worker counting coins for a single meal, they may feel concern. The contrast can spark conversation about why such differences exist. The influence of media also shows up in advertising. A commercial for a luxury watch often shows a sleek office, a city skyline, and a confident executive. The product is linked to success, and the viewer may associate the watch with climbing the social ladder. At the same time, a public service announcement that shows a child studying by a dim lamp can remind viewers of the hardships many families face. Both messages compete for attention, and the one that wins can shape how people view class. In classrooms, teachers sometimes use clips from movies or news reports to discuss class. When a teacher shows a scene where a character is denied a loan because of low credit, students can discuss how financial systems affect the poor. When a teacher shows a scene of a charity gala, students can discuss whether charity solves the problem or just hides it. These discussions help students see the role media plays in shaping ideas. The power of media is not absolute. People can resist messages that do not fit their own experience. Some viewers may watch a drama about wealth and feel that it is just entertainment, not a guide for life. Some activists may create their own media, like podcasts and blogs, to push back against mainstream stories. The rise of independent creators shows that the garden of ideas can have many gardeners, not just a few large ones. In the end, the way media shapes class awareness is a mix of storytelling, technology, and audience choice. Stories about rich families can make wealth seem normal. Stories about low-wage workers can make poverty visible. Counter-arguments remind that media can also just reflect what already exists, and that people can choose to ignore messages. Historical anecdotes like Goldberg's and modern series like Living on $2 a Day prove that simple narratives can have a big impact. Quotes from thinkers like McLuhan and Chomsky remind that tools and messages matter. By looking at everyday ads, viral. The idea of class consciousness first appeared in the work of early socialist thinkers who asked why workers often seemed to accept their own poverty. In the 19th century, Karl Marx described class consciousness as the moment when people recognize that their interests are tied to a larger group, not just to themselves. Later philosophers took that seed and tried to fit it into modern democratic societies. John Rawls, for example, wrote a theory of justice that rests on the idea that a fair system must treat each person as an equal citizen. He said, "Well, justice is the first virtue of social institutions." In simple terms, Rawls argued that a just society is one that would be chosen behind a veil of ignorance, where no one knows their own wealth, race, or gender. The veil forces people to think about the rules that would protect the most vulnerable, which is a kind of class awareness built into the design of law. Thomas Piketty brought a fresh look at class consciousness in the 21st century. In his book, Capital in the 21st Century, he wrote, "When the rate of return on capital exceeds the rate of growth of output, the inevitable result is the concentration of wealth." He showed, with data, that the gap between the richest and the rest has been widening since the 1970s. Piketty's numbers give a clear picture. When a small group owns most of the wealth, the rest of society feels the pressure of higher taxes, lower wages, and reduced public services. That pressure can turn into a sense that the political system is tilted toward the rich. In that way, Piketty's work links economic data directly to the feeling that a class has a shared interest. The link between laws, elections, and class awareness can be seen in everyday political moments. One common example is a local vote on a property tax increase to fund road repairs. In a small town, wealthier homeowners may oppose the tax because it will cost them more, while lower-income families may support it because better roads mean safer trips to work and school. When the community gathers at a town hall, the debate often reveals a split along economic lines. Those who vote for the tax are usually motivated by the belief that public investment benefits everyone, especially those who cannot afford private transportation. Those who vote against it may argue that the government should not raise taxes at all, focusing on the principle of low taxes rather than the impact on different income groups. A second everyday example involves a city council debate over school funding. In many districts, school budgets come from local property taxes. When a proposal to raise the tax is put forward, parents in wealthier neighborhoods may worry that higher taxes will force them to spend more of their own money, while families in poorer neighborhoods see the raise as a chance to get better teachers, smaller class sizes, and more supplies. The council meeting often turns into a discussion about fairness. Should the city spend more on schools that serve low-income students? The answer depends on whether people see the education system as a public good that benefits society as a whole, or as a private matter that each family must handle alone. When voters choose to support the increase, they are expressing a class-based awareness that education helps lift the whole community out of poverty. These examples show how class consciousness can shape political choices. Yet not everyone agrees that class is the main driver of politics. One counter-argument says that politics is about ideology, not class. Proponents of this view claim that people vote based on beliefs about the role of government, personal freedom, or moral values, rather than on their economic position. A conservative thinker might argue that a voter who opposes higher taxes does so because they believe in limited government, not because they belong to a wealthy class. In this view, class consciousness is an afterthought, a label placed on voters by analysts who want to simplify complex motivations. A second counter-argument claims that voting patterns are essentially random. Some political scientists point to the fact that many voters do not follow a consistent pattern, that turnout can be low, and that personal circumstances, such as weather on election day, can swing results. They argue that because many people vote without much information, it is hard to say that any clear class-based trend exists. From this perspective, the idea of a unified working-class vote is more myth than reality. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they also overlook key evidence. Historical anecdotes help to show how class awareness can move whole societies. In the 1930s, the New Deal reforms under President Franklin D. Roosevelt responded directly to the demands of workers who were suffering through the Great Depression. Programs like Social Security, unemployment insurance, and public works projects were designed to lift the poorest out of hardship. These policies were not merely ideological. They were the result of a growing sense among ordinary people that the government should protect them from economic ruin. The New Deal era illustrates how a shared experience of poverty can turn into a political movement that reshapes law. A more recent anecdote comes from the 2011 Occupy Wall Street protests. Protesters gathered in public squares with signs that read, "We are the 99%. The slogan captured a feeling that a tiny elite held most of the wealth, while the majority struggled with stagnant wages and rising costs. The movement sparked debates about tax policy, corporate influence, and the fairness of the financial system. Although Occupy did not win any elections, it pushed the issue of wealth inequality onto the national agenda. The protests showed how a sense of class solidarity can create a powerful political voice, even without a formal party structure. Modern interpretations of class consciousness often blend Rawls' ideas of fairness with Piketty's data on wealth concentration. Some scholars argue that a political class consciousness emerges when voters recognize that certain policies, such as progressive taxation, universal health care, or affordable housing, directly affect their material well-being. They point to recent elections where candidates who promised higher taxes on the rich and more public spending attracted strong support from middle and lower-income voters. In these cases, the voters' sense of shared economic interest becomes a decisive factor in the outcome. Other analysts focus on the role of media in shaping class awareness. News outlets, social media platforms, and talk shows often frame political debates in ways that highlight or hide class issues. For instance, a news story that emphasizes the moral virtue of hard work may downplay structural barriers, while a report that highlights rising rent prices may draw attention to the struggles of low-income renters. When media repeatedly shows images of wealthy donors influencing elections, it can reinforce the idea that politics is a game for the rich, prompting ordinary citizens to rally for reforms. Conversely, media that focuses on cultural issues, like identity politics, can shift attention away from economic concerns, making class less visible in public discourse. Looking beyond the United States, global perspectives add more depth to the discussion. In many European countries, parties that identify as social democratic have built their platforms on the principle that the state should reduce economic inequality. In Sweden, for example, high taxes fund universal health care and free university education, reflecting a broad consensus that society benefits when wealth is shared. In contrast, some emerging economies experience rapid growth without strong redistributive policies, leading to sharp divides between the urban elite and rural poor. In those places, class consciousness can fuel protests, as seen in the 2019 Chilean demonstrations that began over subway fare hikes and grew into a broader demand for economic justice. These global cases show that the interaction between law, elections, and class awareness is not limited to any one nation. To bring the ideas together, an analogy can be used. Imagine a garden where each plant represents a citizen. If the soil is rich and water is shared equally, all plants grow strong and the garden looks healthy. If only a few plants receive most of the water, the others wilt, and the garden becomes patchy. Laws and policies are the irrigation system. When the system is designed with class consciousness in mind, it distributes water fairly, and the garden thrives. When the system ignores the needs of the smaller plants, the garden suffers, and the weeds of discontent grow. This simple picture helps to see why class awareness matters for political decisions. Returning to the two everyday political examples, the property tax vote and the school funding debate both illustrate the garden analogy. In the tax vote, the decision determines whether the irrigation pipe is widened to reach more plants or left narrow, favoring only the tallest ones. In the school funding debate, the question is whether the garden's caretaker will invest in new tools that help all seedlings grow, or keep the old tools that only benefit the already strong plants. When voters think about the long-term health of the garden, they are exercising class consciousness. The counter-arguments that politics is purely ideological or random can be compared to a gardener who claims that the shape of the garden depends only on the type of flowers, not on how water is shared, or that the wind decides which plants get sunlight. While those factors matter, they do not explain why a drought can cause a whole section of the garden to die. Similarly, ignoring class overlooks a major force that shapes political outcomes. Quotes from primary sources reinforce the points. John Rawls wrote, "The principles of justice are chosen behind a veil of ignorance." This line reminds listeners that fairness requires imagining a world where personal wealth is unknown, which is a direct appeal to class-based fairness. Thomas Piketty noted, "The concentration of wealth is not a natural fact, but a political choice." This statement ties the distribution of wealth to the decisions made by governments and voters. Both quotes help to anchor the discussion in the words of the original thinkers. Media influence can be seen in the way election coverage frames tax proposals. When a news program describes a tax increase as burdensome for families, it may sway viewers to see the policy as harmful to the lower class, even if the revenue would fund services that help those families. When another outlet calls the same proposal necessary investment in infrastructure, It frames the issue as a collective benefit, encouraging a broader view of class interests. The way language is used can either sharpen or blur class consciousness in the public mind. Looking ahead, the next segment will travel beyond national borders to examine how class consciousness shapes politics in places like Brazil, India, and South Africa. Those stories will show how different histories, cultures, and media environments create unique patterns of class awareness. By comparing these global cases, the viewer can see how the same basic ideas about law, elections, and shared economic interest play out in many forms. The journey will reveal that while the garden may look different in each country, the need for a fair irrigation system remains the same. The story of class consciousness begins far before the word was ever written down. In ancient markets, in village gatherings, in city streets, people felt the weight of who owned what and who could decide how food was shared. That feeling is what scholars call class consciousness, the sense that a group of people can see themselves as having a common economic position and can act together because of that view. One early voice that shaped the modern idea was Karl Marx. Marx wrote that workers would come to realize that they shared the same interests against the owners of factories. He called this the proletarian class and argued that when workers see their shared position, they can unite to change the system. Marx's work spread across the world, but the way people understood class varied from place to place. In the 20th century, Amartya Sen added a new angle. Sen said that class is not only about money, but also about the ability to live a life one values. He wrote, "Poverty is not just about low income, it is also about the lack of capabilities to lead a life one has reason to value." In simple terms, Sen reminded listeners that class can be measured by what people can do, not just what they earn. His ideas helped bring a broader view of class into discussions about health, education, and freedom. Frantz Fanon, a thinker from the Caribbean who wrote about colonialism, also touched on class. He noted that the struggle of the colonized was linked to economic oppression. He said, "Each generation must, out of relative obscurity, discover its mission, fulfill it, and pass it on." For Fanon, the fight against racism and the fight against class were tied together. He kept his language clear, so the link could be felt by anyone reading his work. Across the globe, the picture of class looks different. In India, a farmer's market is a place where small growers bring fresh vegetables, spices, and grains to sell directly to families. The market is noisy, full of bright colors, and the price of a tomato can change from one day to the next. The sellers often work the same land they own, but they also borrow money from local lenders. When the monsoon fails, they may lose their harvest and fall into debt. In that moment, the sellers feel a shared risk that ties them together. They may form a cooperative, a small group that decides together how to share profits or negotiate better prices with larger buyers. That cooperation is a clear example of class consciousness growing from daily experience. In Canada, a suburban mall tells a different story. The mall is a large building with many stores, each offering brand-name clothing, electronics, and food. Shoppers drive in from neighborhoods that vary in income. Inside, a teenager may buy a cheap t-shirt, while a parent picks up a high-priced laptop. The workers behind the counters are often part-time employees, some of whom are recent immigrants. They may earn minimum wage and rely on tips. The mall's management decides the rent for each store, and the big chain stores can afford higher rent, pushing out smaller local shops. The workers and the low-rent stores share a common economic position. They depend on the flow of customers and the decisions of the mall owners. When a protest about low wages spreads through social media, those workers may join a union to demand higher pay. That union effort shows class consciousness forming in a modern, consumer-driven setting. These two scenes illustrate how class can appear in very different places. The farmer market is rooted in agriculture, local traditions, and seasonal cycles. The suburban mall is tied to global brands, digital advertising, and a car-dependent lifestyle. Yet both show people recognizing a shared economic situation and acting together. Some scholars argue that the idea of class is a Western invention. They point out that the word class comes from European history, where industrial factories created a clear split between owners and workers. They claim that in many societies, people think more in terms of caste, tribe, or family lineage than in terms of class. This view suggests that applying the term class consciousness to places like India or Brazil may be imposing a foreign lens. A second counter-argument says that globalization has erased the importance of class. In a world where goods travel across oceans in minutes, where jobs can be done from any country, and where online platforms let anyone sell to anyone else, some believe that class divisions have become less relevant. They argue that people now identify more with their online communities or with global brands than with local economic groups. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they also miss parts of the story. Even when people use different labels, they still feel the pressure of who owns resources and who does not. In Brazil, a land reform movement in the 1980s showed this clearly. Rural workers, known as latifundia tenants, lived on large estates owned by a few wealthy families. They organized marches, occupied land, and demanded that the government redistribute unused land to small farmers. Their slogan was simple: land for those who work it. The movement grew because the workers recognized that they shared a common lack of land and a common desire for change. Their actions changed laws and created new cooperatives that still exist today. This episode proves that class consciousness can arise even when the local language talks about land instead of class. In South Africa, the end of apartheid in 1994 brought a new political era. The country moved from a system that separated people by race to one that promised equality for all citizens. Yet the economic gap remained wide. Rich white families still owned most of the businesses, while many black South Africans faced unemployment and poor housing. Debates in Parliament and in the media focused on how to close that gap. Some leaders argued for black economic empowerment, a policy that would give black South Africans a share of ownership in companies. Others warned that such policies could create new forms of favoritism. The public discussions showed that people were aware of a shared economic disadvantage and were trying to find ways to address it together. The South African experience links class to race, showing how the two can intertwine. These real-world stories connect directly to politics and media. When a country's government decides how to tax the rich, how to fund schools, or how to protect workers, it is responding to class concerns. Media outlets shape how people see those issues. A news report that highlights a strike at a factory can make viewers aware of workers' grievances. A documentary about a farmer's market can show the challenges of small producers. In the next part of the video, the channel will explore how political parties use class language to win votes and how journalists frame class stories to attract audiences. Modern interpretations of class consciousness often blend the old with the new. Some thinkers combine sense capability approach with digital data. They look at how internet access, mobile phone ownership, and online education affect what people can do. If a community lacks broadband, its members may feel left out of the digital economy. That feeling can spark a new kind of class awareness, one that focuses on the digital divide rather than just wages. In Canada, a study showed that neighborhoods with limited internet saw lower school performance and fewer job opportunities. Residents formed a neighborhood association, petitioned the city, and succeeded in getting a public Wi-Fi hub installed. Their success shows how class consciousness can adapt to new technologies. In India, the rise of e-commerce platforms has changed the farmer market scene. Small growers can now list their produce online, reaching buyers in distant cities. Yet the platforms charge fees that can eat into profits. When several growers realized they were paying similar fees, they formed a digital cooperative. They negotiated lower fees and shared delivery costs. Their story demonstrates how class awareness can shift from a physical market to an online marketplace. Two analogies help make the idea clearer. Imagine a school playground. Some children have brand new sneakers, while others wear worn-out shoes. The children with new shoes may be able to run faster, climb higher, and join certain games. Over time, the children notice this gap and may decide to share shoes or ask the teacher for equal equipment. Their shared feeling about the shoe gap is a simple form of class consciousness. In another analogy, think of a river that splits a town. One side of the river has a modern bridge and bright lights. The other side has older homes and fewer jobs. People on the poorer side may feel that the bridge gives the other side an advantage. If they organize to demand a new bridge or better public transport, they are acting on class awareness. The history of class thought also includes lesser-known voices. In the early 1900s, Indian activist Gopal Krishna Gokhale wrote about the vulmas of the people who were left out of the British-run economy. He urged the creation of cooperative societies to give workers a voice. His ideas influenced later Indian leaders who built farmer cooperatives in states like Punjab. These cooperatives still function today, showing how early class ideas can have lasting impact. In the United Kingdom, the winter of discontent in 1978-79 saw thousands of public workers strike over low pay and rising living costs. The strikes were covered heavily by the media, and many citizens began to see the connection between wages, inflation, and government policy. The public's growing awareness helped shape the election of a new government that promised to curb inflation and limit union power. That episode links class consciousness to political change and media coverage. Quotes from primary sources give a human voice to these ideas. From Sen's book Development as Freedom, the line reads, "The real freedom of a person is the ability to choose the life he or she has reason to value." From Fanon's The Wretched of the Earth, the passage says, "The colonized can see the world only through the eyes of the colonizer, and this vision blinds them to their own possibilities." Both sentences are short, clear, and speak directly to the heart of class and oppression. When the video moves to the politics segment, it will show how parties use slogans like fair wages for all or tax the rich to tap into class feelings. When it moves to the media segment, it will examine how headlines such as "Workers walk out over pay cuts" or "Farmers protest new taxes" shape public perception. By linking these sections, the viewer can see the full cycle. Ideas form, people feel a shared position, they act, politics responds, and media reports the outcome. In sum, class consciousness is not a single idea that looks the same everywhere. It appears in a farmer market in Delhi, in a suburban mall in Toronto, in a land reform march in Brazil, and in post-apartheid debates in Johannesburg. Thinkers like Marx, Sen, and Fanon gave language to the feeling that people share a common economic fate. Critics who call class a Western concept or claim that globalization has erased it raise important questions, but real-world stories show that people still notice and act on economic differences. Whether the battle is over land, wages, digital access, or representation, the core pattern remains. A group sees itself as having a shared position, and that awareness can lead to collective action. The next chapters will trace how that action shapes laws, how news outlets frame the struggle, and how the world continues to wrestle with the question of who gets what and why. The story of class consciousness has always been linked to the tools that people use to earn a living. From the first plow to the steam engine, each new invention has changed the way work is organized and who holds power. In the digital age, the newest tools are robots, artificial intelligence, and platforms that connect buyers and sellers with a tap. The rise of these technologies has sparked fresh questions about class. How do machines affect the balance between owners of capital and workers who sell their time? What new groups might appear when code can do the work that humans once did? The answers are still forming, and the debate draws on many voices. One voice comes from Erik Brynjolfsson, a professor who studies how digital tools change the economy. He writes that technology can be a force multiplier for capital. In plain terms, this means that a machine can make the money of the owner grow faster, while the worker's share may stay the same or shrink. Brynjolfsson points to data that shows productivity rising faster than wages. He says that the gap between the rich and the rest widens when the gains from new tools go mainly to those who own them. This idea fits the classic view of class. A small group controls the means of production, while the many sell labor. A second voice is Martin Ford, author of a book that warns of a coming second machine age. Ford writes, The rise of the machines will reshape work in ways we have not yet imagined. He argues that as AI gets better at tasks that used to require thinking, many middle-class jobs will disappear. The result, he says, could be a great polarization, where a few own the technology and most have to find new ways to survive. Ford's warning is that class lines may become sharper, not softer. The origins of this debate go back to the Industrial Revolution. When factories first used steam power, workers feared that machines would take their jobs. Those fears were real, but the new factories also created many new positions. The pattern repeats today. New digital tools can both destroy and create. The question for class consciousness is whether the new jobs are enough, and whether they belong to the same group of people who own the technology. A simple everyday example is the gig economy app that matches riders with drivers. The app itself is a piece of software that lives on a phone. It connects a passenger who needs a ride with a driver who has a car. The driver gets paid for each trip, but the platform takes a cut of the fare. The platform's owners earn money from every ride, even though they do not drive. In this setup, the driver is both a worker and a small business owner. Yet the platform decides the rules, the rates, and the data. The power to set those rules rests with the owners of the app, not with the drivers. This creates a new class relationship. A digital landlord who rents out space on a screen, and a fleet of workers who rent their labor. A second everyday example is the self-checkout lane at a grocery store. The lane uses a computer to scan items, accept payment, and bag groceries. The store saves on the cost of a cashier, and the machine works all day without breaks. The workers who used to stand at the register may be moved to other tasks, such as stocking shelves or helping customers in the aisles. The store's profit goes up, while the number of cashiers goes down. The technology replaces a human role, shifting the balance of power toward the owners of the machines. The workers who remain may have to learn new skills, but the overall demand for the old job disappears. Both examples show how technology can change the way class is felt. In the gig economy case, the platform owners sit at the top of a new digital pyramid. In the self-checkout case, the machine sits between the store owner and the cashier. The workers in both stories may feel less secure, because the tools they rely on can be changed or removed at any time. There are strong arguments that technology does not hurt class relations, but rather creates new opportunities. One common claim is that every wave of automation has historically created more jobs than it destroyed. When the first factories opened, many people left farms and found work in the new plants. Later, The computer age produced millions of jobs in software, support, and networking. Proponents of this view point to data that shows overall employment numbers rising after each major technological shift. They argue that robots and AI will open up fresh fields, like robot maintenance, data labeling, and AI ethics, that will absorb displaced workers. A second counter-argument says that workers can always retrain. The idea is that education systems can adapt, offering new courses that match the needs of the digital economy. If a cashier loses a job to a self-checkout lane, the worker could learn to become a technician who repairs those machines. If a driver loses income to autonomous vehicles, the driver could study to become a software tester for autonomous systems. The belief is that human flexibility will keep pace with machine speed, so class divisions will not harden. Both counter-arguments have merit, but they also face challenges. The claim that more jobs appear later often ignores the time lag between job loss and job creation. A worker who loses a paycheck today cannot wait years for a new market to emerge. The claim that retraining is always possible assumes that the worker has access to affordable education, internet, and time. Many workers in low-paid jobs cannot afford to take a semester off to study. The gap between the owners of technology and the people who need to learn new skills can widen the class divide. Historical anecdotes help to see these patterns. In the 1990s, the dot-com boom promised a flood of new internet jobs. Young people rushed to learn programming, hoping to ride the wave. For a few years, salaries rose dramatically, and many new firms appeared. Yet the bubble burst in 2000, and thousands of workers found themselves unemployed. Some managed to shift into other tech roles, but many did not have the skills to move. The boom and bust left a generation that remembered both the excitement of new tech and the pain of sudden loss. The lesson is that technology can raise expectations faster than reality can keep up. A second anecdote comes from the year 2020, when the COVID-19 pandemic forced many offices to close. Companies turned to video calling platforms, cloud services, and remote work tools. The shift was rapid, and many workers learned to use new software overnight. The change showed how quickly a large part of the economy could move to a digital mode. At the same time, the shift revealed a split. Workers with reliable internet and a quiet home could keep their jobs, while those in crowded housing or with poor connections struggled. The pandemic highlighted how access to technology can become a class marker, separating those who can work from those who cannot. These stories connect to the way media shapes class thinking. News outlets often report on poor job-killing robots or taking over. Such headlines can make the idea of a class split seem inevitable. Social media spreads personal stories of gig workers who feel exploited, or of store employees who miss human interaction at the checkout. At the same time, tech magazines celebrate the future of work, showing sleek offices where humans collaborate with bots. The mix of fear and optimism in media influences how people see their own class position. When the narrative leans toward panic, workers may feel more alienated. When it leans toward optimism, they may feel hopeful about new opportunities. Modern interpretations of class in the age of automation often use the term new digital proletariat. This phrase borrows from Marx, who described the working class as those who sell their labor. The digital proletariat includes gig workers, low-skill service employees, and anyone whose job can be replaced by code. At the same time, a new digital bourgeoisie emerges. Venture capitalists, platform founders, and owners of data centers. They own the code, the servers, and the algorithms that generate profit. The division is less about factories and more about data streams and cloud services. An analogy can help to picture this shift. Imagine a river that once flowed slowly through a valley, allowing farmers to plant crops along its banks. The river represents labor. When a dam is built, the water is redirected into turbines that generate electricity. The turbines are the machines. The owners of the dam collect the power, while the farmers must find new ways to use the land. Some may plant new crops that grow in the shadow of the dam, but many will have to move to a different valley. The river still exists, but its path and purpose have changed. In the same way, automation redirects the flow of work toward the owners of the machines, reshaping the landscape of class. A second analogy compares the labor market to a game of musical chairs. Each round of technology adds new chairs, but also removes some old ones. The music stops, and those without a seat must stand. If the game adds more chairs than it removes, most players find a place. If it removes chairs faster than it adds them, many are left standing. The speed of the music, how fast technology changes, affects how many can keep up. When the tempo is quick, fewer people can learn the steps in time, and the gap between those who sit and those who stand grows. Quotes from the thinkers add weight to the discussion. Eric Brynjolfsson said, "When technology advances faster than the ability of workers to learn, inequality rises." Martin Ford warned, "The future of work will not be a smooth transition, but a jarring shift that leaves many behind." Both statements underline the central worry, that the speed of change may outpace the capacity of workers to adapt, deepening class divides. Real-world applications of these ideas can be seen in policy debates. Some cities have begun to tax gig economy platforms to fund training programs for drivers. Others have introduced a robot tax that would charge owners of automated systems, using the revenue to support displaced workers. These proposals try to balance the benefits of technology with the need to protect the labor side of the equation. The success of such policies will depend on how society views the relationship between machines and people. Looking ahead, the Future Outlook section will ask whether new forms of class organization can arise. Will workers form digital unions that bargain with platform owners? Can governments create safety nets that keep pace with rapid automation? Will education become a lifelong service, constantly updating skills as technology evolves? The answers will shape whether the digital age deepens old class lines or creates a more fluid, shared economy. In summary, the impact of robots and AI on class thinking is complex. The tools themselves are neutral, but the way they are owned and used creates power imbalances. Thinkers like Brynjolfsson and Ford highlight the risk that capital owners will capture most of the gains, while workers may lose security. Everyday examples such as gig economy apps and self-checkout lanes show the shift in real time. Counter-arguments that technology always creates jobs, and that workers can always retrain offer hope, but they often overlook barriers to education and timing gaps. Historical anecdotes from the dot-com boom and the 2020 remote work surge illustrate how rapid change can both open doors and widen gaps. Media narratives shape public perception, and modern terms like digital proletariat and digital bourgeoisie help to name the new groups. Analogies of rivers and musical chairs make the abstract ideas clear. Quotes from the primary sources give voice to the debate. The story continues, and the next part of the video will explore how media influence and future policy might reshape class in the age of automation. The next part of the story looks at the ways that the idea of class consciousness has been challenged and the other lenses that thinkers have offered to understand society. In the earlier sections, the definition of class consciousness was laid out, and the political implications of that definition were explored. Now the focus shifts to the questions that have been raised about that definition, and to the new paths that have been suggested. One of the first criticisms comes from scholars who say that looking only at class can hide other sources of inequality. Max Weber, writing in a simpler way than his original German, warned that social life is divided not only by economic position, but also by status and party. In plain language, this means that people are sorted not just by what they earn, but also by the groups they belong to, such as race, gender, or religion. When the analysis stays locked on income alone, it can miss the ways that a black woman, for example, may face barriers that are not explained by her paycheck. This critique is often called the intersectional critique. It reminds the audience that a single pair of glasses can only show part of the picture. If the glasses are tinted only with class, the colors of race and gender fade away. A second popular critique comes from the belief that personal ambition matters more than collective class awareness. Some commentators argue that the modern world rewards individual effort and that people can rise through hard work regardless of their background. They point to stories of entrepreneurs who started with little and built large companies. The argument says that if people focus on their own goals, the whole system improves. This view is sometimes called the meritocratic argument. It suggests that the engine of society runs best when each person pulls his or her own weight, rather than when people think first of a class group. Both of these critiques have been voiced in public debates and in academic articles. They have also been felt in real life. In the 1960s, the feminist movement faced a heated discussion about class. Some women in the movement argued that the fight should be about gender alone, while others insisted that class could not be ignored. One activist wrote, "We cannot free the woman without freeing the worker." The debate showed how the focus on gender could clash with the focus on class, and how the two could also support each other. The tension in that era illustrates the first critique in a vivid way. A second anecdote comes from the 1990s, when environmental justice protests rose in many cities. Communities of color and low-income neighborhoods stood together to demand clean water and air. They pointed out that pollution was not spread evenly. It fell harder on the poor and on people of color. A protest leader said, "Our health is not a luxury for the rich." The protests combined concerns about race, class, and the environment, showing that a single-issue focus can leave out important connections. This story supports the idea that class alone does not capture the whole struggle. Michael Sandel, a contemporary philosopher, adds another voice to the discussion. He writes, "True justice is not just about the market, but about the common good." In his view, the market can be a useful tool, but it does not decide what is fair for a community. Sandel's comment pushes the conversation toward a broader view of society, one that includes values, traditions, and shared responsibilities. His words echo the call for alternatives that go beyond class. One alternative lens is the community-based identity approach. This view asks people to think of themselves first as members of a neighborhood, a cultural group, or a faith community. It suggests that people's sense of belonging often comes from these smaller circles rather than from a broad class label. For example, a person might feel a stronger tie to a local gardening club than to a national labor union. The community lens highlights how local bonds can shape political action, social support, and personal meaning. It also offers a way to bring race, gender, and other identities into the picture without losing the sense of shared purpose. A second alternative comes from ecological economics. This school of thought looks at the economy as part of a larger natural system. It argues that the health of the planet should be a central concern in any discussion of wealth and poverty. Ecological economists say that a society that ignores the environment will eventually harm everyone, rich and poor alike. They propose measures such as state economics, which aims for stable production and consumption levels that stay within ecological limits. This approach expands the conversation from who gets what money to how the whole system uses resources. To make these ideas clearer, an analogy can be used. Think of society as a garden. The class view looks at the garden, by counting the number of roses. The intersectional critique says, look at the soil, the sunlight, and the insects too. The community lens adds, notice the gardener's tools and the way the neighbors share the harvest. The ecological view reminds everyone, remember the rain and the climate that make the garden grow. Each perspective adds a layer that helps the garden thrive. Another analogy compares society to a music band. The class focus listens only to the bass line. The critique that adds race and gender says, listen to the drums and the vocals as well. The meritocratic view says, let each player solo when they can. The community-based lens says, play together as a small ensemble that knows each other's strengths. The ecological approach says, make sure the stage is safe and the sound system does not harm the audience. By hearing all the parts, the performance becomes richer. Returning to Weber, a direct quote from his work can be used. He wrote, class, status, and party are three distinct sources of power. This sentence reminds the audience that power does not come from a single source. It also backs up the claim that focusing only on class leaves out other important routes to influence. Sandel's own words, the good life is not a private affair, but a public one, reinforce the idea that society must be seen as a shared space where many factors matter. The critique that personal ambition matters more than class has its own supporters. Some writers point to the story of a young man from a rural town who earned a scholarship, started a tech startup, and later employed many people from his hometown. They claim that his success shows how individual drive can lift whole communities. Yet even this story can be examined with the alternative lenses. The community view would ask how his hometown's culture helped him stay motivated. The ecological view would ask whether his company's growth respects environmental limits. By looking through multiple lenses, the story becomes richer and more balanced. In practice, the alternative lenses have been used to shape policies. Community-based identity has inspired local participatory budgeting programs, where residents decide how a portion of the city budget is spent. These programs let people see themselves as part of a decision-making group, not just as members of a class. Ecological economics has influenced the development of carbon taxes and green public procurement rules. Both sets of policies try to address the shortcomings that critics see in a pure class analysis. Real-world examples illustrate the impact. In Porto Alegre, Brazil, participatory budgeting began in the 1990s. Citizens from different neighborhoods, income levels, and cultural backgrounds gathered to allocate funds for schools, parks, and health clinics. The process showed how a community lens can bring together people who might otherwise be divided by class. Another example comes from the city of Copenhagen, which has set a goal to become carbon neutral by 2025. The plan mixes economic incentives with community projects such as bike share programs and neighborhood energy co-op. The ecological lens guides the city to think beyond profit and toward longer-term environmental health. The two critiques and the two alternatives also interact with each other. The intersectional critique and the community lens both call for a broader sense of belonging. The meritocratic critique and the ecological view both stress the role of personal choice, but the ecological view adds a reminder that choices affect the planet. By holding the ideas side by side, viewers can see how they complement or challenge each other. A final anecdote helps to close the section. In the early 2000s, a group of teachers in a Midwestern town organized a fair wages campaign. They started by talking about class, how teachers earned less than other professionals. As the campaign grew, they invited parents, many of whom were immigrants, and local environmental groups who were concerned about school building energy use. The coalition ended up demanding not only higher pay, but also better ventilation, greener school meals, and cultural respect for all families. The story shows how a class-based thought can evolve into a broader movement that includes race, gender, community identity, and ecological concerns. To sum up, the critiques of class consciousness remind listeners that focusing on money alone can miss important parts of life. The first critique points to race and gender, the second points to personal ambition. The alternative lenses of community-based identity and ecological economics offer ways to fill those gaps. Historical anecdotes from the 1960s feminist debates and the 1990s environmental justice protests give concrete examples of how these ideas have played out. Quotes from Max Weber and Michael Sandel give authority to the discussion. Analogies of a garden and a band make the concepts easy to picture. By keeping the conversation open to many angles, the study of society becomes richer, more inclusive, and more useful for the challenges of today. The future of class awareness feels like a quiet river that may change its course over time. In earlier parts of the discussion, the story began with the birth of class ideas in the industrial age, moved through the work of Marx, Engels, and later thinkers, and examined how modern economies have reshaped the way people see each other. Now the focus turns to what may come next. The aim is to look at possible paths, to weigh hopeful ideas against skeptical voices, and to show how real experiments already give a glimpse of what could happen. One way to picture the next step is to think of class awareness as a light that can be turned brighter or dimmer by the policies that shape daily life. When a government decides to give every adult a small sum of money each month, that decision can change how people think about work, wealth, and belonging. The idea is called Universal Basic Income, or UBI. In 2019, Finland ran a trial that paid a modest amount to a group of unemployed citizens. The trial lasted 2 years. Participants reported that they felt less stress about money and more freedom to look for jobs that matched their skills. One participant said, "I could finally think about learning new things instead of just trying to survive." The experiment did not dramatically lower unemployment, but it showed that a steady cash flow can shift how people view their place in the economy. That shift is a small step toward a new kind of class consciousness, one that sees security as a shared right, rather than a privilege earned only by a few. Another forward-looking example comes from the growing need to move jobs away from carbon-intensive industries. Climate change forces societies to change the way they produce energy, transport goods, and heat homes. In many countries, factories that once offered stable wages are closing, while new jobs in renewable energy, electric vehicle production, and green construction are appearing. The transition can create a split between workers who gain new opportunities and those who lose their old jobs. If the shift is guided by policies that help displaced workers retrain and join the new sectors, a sense of shared purpose can grow. If the shift is left to market forces alone, old divisions may deepen. The way societies manage this climate-driven job shift will shape the next chapter of class awareness. Yuval Noah Harari, a historian who writes in plain language, often reminds listeners that technology can rewrite the rules of who gets power. He says, "The future will be decided by those who control data, not by those who own factories." In a world where data becomes a major source of wealth, a new class may form around information. Harari suggests that if the benefits of data are shared widely, a fresh sense of class solidarity could arise. If data stays in the hands of a few corporations, a new hierarchy will replace the old one. His simple view helps keep the discussion grounded in everyday terms. Kate Raworth, an economist known for the donut model, argues that economies should aim to meet the basic needs of all people while staying within planetary limits. She writes, "We need an economy that works for people and the planet together." Raworth's idea implies that class consciousness will not disappear, but will be reshaped by the need to balance human welfare with ecological health. In her view, policies that ensure a safety net, such as UBI, combined with strong environmental standards, can create a new kind of class awareness, one that links economic fairness with climate responsibility. These hopeful visions meet two strong counter-arguments. The first claim is that class will fade away as wealth becomes more evenly shared. Some futurists argue that blockchain technology, digital currencies, and global sharing platforms will spread wealth so widely that old class lines will blur. They point to experiments where communities pool resources and make decisions together, saying that such models show a path to a classless world. Critics of this view note that even in digital economies, power tends to concentrate in the hands of early adopters and large platforms. The claim that wealth sharing alone will erase class does not address the deeper social bonds that tie identity to work, status, and community. The second counter-argument warns that new divisions will appear even as old ones fade. Some sociologists suggest that as automation replaces routine jobs, a gap will open between those who can command advanced technology and those who cannot. They call this split digital class or skill class. The argument is that any attempt to erase class will simply create a fresh hierarchy based on access to education, digital tools, and network connections. This view reminds listeners that history often shows how new categories replace old ones rather than disappear completely. Real-world examples illustrate both hopes and doubts. The Finnish UBI trial, mentioned earlier, gave a concrete look at how cash security can change people's sense of belonging. While participants felt less anxiety, the broader labor market did not shift dramatically. The experiment suggests that cash alone may not dissolve class lines, but it can soften the edges. A second example comes from the 2021 global climate strikes. Young people in many countries walked out of schools and workplaces to demand action on climate change. In many cities, the protesters linked their demands to economic justice, saying that the rich should pay more for the damage caused by pollution. The strikes showed that climate concerns can bring together people from different income groups, creating a shared sense of purpose. At the same time, the protests also highlighted a split between those who could afford to travel to the protests and those who could not, hinting at the persistence of economic divides. Historical anecdotes help to see how class awareness has changed before. In the 1930s, during the Great Depression, the United States launched the New Deal. Programs like the Works Progress Administration gave jobs to millions of unemployed workers. The effort created a feeling that the government could act on behalf of the working class, and it forged a new sense of solidarity among people who had once felt left behind. Yet, after the war, the rise of consumer culture and suburban growth created new layers of class, showing how a single policy can reshape awareness only for a time. Another anecdote comes from the post-World War II era in Europe, when many countries built comprehensive welfare states. In Sweden, the folkhemmet or all people's homes idea promised that everyone would have access to healthcare, education, and housing. This model helped many citizens feel that they belonged to a shared community, reducing sharp class gaps. Decades later, as globalization and technology altered the job market, Sweden faced new challenges, and the old sense of class solidarity faced pressure. The story shows that even strong welfare systems must adapt to stay relevant. To understand how class consciousness may evolve, it helps to use a simple analogy. Imagine a garden. In the past, the garden was tended by a few wealthy owners who decided which plants grew. The Industrial Revolution planted new seeds, and the garden became more crowded. Today, new gardeners bring fresh tools, solar panels, data sensors, and community compost bins. If the gardeners share tools and knowledge, the garden can produce food for everyone. If only a few keep the best tools, The garden will split into sections where some plants thrive and others wither. The way the garden is managed will decide whether a new sense of shared care grows or whether old fences reappear. Looking ahead, several possible paths can be outlined. One path follows the expansion of cash safety nets. If more countries adopt UBI or similar programs, people may feel less tied to precarious work. This could lead to a broader sense that economic security is a collective right, strengthening class awareness that focuses on fairness rather than competition. In this scenario, the idea of class becomes less about who owns factories and more about who ensures that everyone has enough to live with dignity. A second path centers on climate-driven restructuring. As the world moves away from fossil fuels, new industries will rise. If policies ensure that workers in declining sectors receive training and support, a sense of solidarity can develop across old and new sectors. The shared goal of protecting the planet may become a new binding factor, creating a class consciousness that links ecological stewardship with economic justice. A third path, more skeptical, sees wealth and data becoming even more concentrated. If large tech firms keep controlling the most valuable resources, a digital elite may emerge. In that case, class awareness could shift toward a divide between those who have access to data and those who do not. The old language of workers may change to data owners and data users, but the underlying sense of inequality would stay. A fourth path imagines that new forms of community ownership will replace old hierarchies. Cooperative enterprises, community land trusts, and shared ownership models could spread. In such a world, people might identify more with the groups that own the means of production together, rather than with a distant corporation. This could create a class awareness that is rooted in shared governance and mutual support. Each of these paths depends on choices made by governments, businesses, and citizens. The stories of Finland and the climate strikes show that small experiments can have big symbolic power. They also reveal that change rarely happens in a straight line. The Finnish trial taught that cash alone does not erase class, but it can soften the daily pressure that fuels division. The climate strikes taught that a common cause can bring different income groups together, yet also that unequal access to resources can still shape who can join the movement. Quotes from primary sources add depth to the discussion. Karl Marx wrote, "The history of all hitherto existing society is the history of class struggles." This line reminds listeners that class has always been a driving force in history. Harari adds, "The biggest risk is that we lose control of the stories we tell about ourselves." In the context of class, this means that the narrative about who belongs where can shape reality. Raworth says, "We must design economies that are fit for the planet and fit for people." Her words point to a future where economic systems are judged not just by profit, but by how they treat both humans and the earth. To tie everything together, the narrative returns to the idea that class consciousness is not a fixed object, but a living process. It has been born in factories, grown in unions, been reshaped by welfare states, and now faces new tests in the digital and climate arenas. The future will likely hold a mix of old patterns and new forms. Some people will argue that wealth sharing will make class irrelevant. Others will warn that new hierarchies will appear, just under different names. The real outcome will depend on how societies choose to balance cash security, environmental stewardship, and shared ownership. In the calm moments at the end of the video, the narrator invites listeners to imagine a world where the sense of belonging is not tied to a narrow definition of work or wealth. The image of a garden tended by many hands, with sunlight reaching every corner, serves as a gentle reminder that the path forward is open. Whether the garden thrives through shared tools, new seeds, or careful pruning, the story of class awareness will continue to unfold. The final thought rests on the idea that awareness itself can be a quiet force, guiding choices that shape the future for all.